Yeah, well, here we are. Let's see. Saturday, about a week from today. Today I'm doing this. Would be Sunday for you, I think. We're planning that live show, having reached the 2,500 subscriber mark. So stay tuned for more information. I'm sure you'll see things on here today on the screen, thanks to my conscientious producer. Oh, by the way, speaking of conscientious producers, hope you'll overlook it when I show you this mug that was made after he'd won a film slam. I'm sure he wants me to tell you about this here. I'm supposed to show it this way. There it is, nice and centered. Anyway, if anybody wants to actually watch something that he's produced that's independent and part of, I think it was developmental for Whitaker. But anyway, they're 48-hour film slams, they're called, across the country. And this was out in the Vermont, New Hampshire area. And the film is called Journey to the American Cinema. And they receive a classification of film and then a bunch of other stuff they have to do to get the film. So they can only do so they can't do any pre-making of the film. And his assignment was a foreign film, so they made a rather Russian one. And so there it is. Anyway, nice mug. And it's also cold out today. I'm needing my warm tea for all you guys in the British side of things. I'm normally a coffee guy. So there's that. When I was a student with Gamble, I remember him asking me once who I thought the 5 top painters of all time were. I don't know if we ever got to asking who the top 5 paintings of all time were or anything like that. But David D, who's works with me in various times and places. These are funny times. And as part of the composition class online, asks if you could go back in time and sit down for a cup of coffee or a beer and have a conversation with 3 artists of the past, who would you choose? Reminded me very much of the kind of question that Gamma would bring up. Is a perfectly good one, and I imagine that people in other fields would be asked a similar kind of a question. It's one you may want to ask yourself, in fact should. What would you want to discuss and what questions would you have for them? My first reaction to this was, I'm not going to make a decision about blah, 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 But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, it might be a nice bit of self-introspection, actually, to begin to see where I am right now. And so I began thinking about it, and you're about to see what I've come up with. But one of the interesting things about doing something like this is that you realize that you're not in the same place you once were, either in terms of mostly related to your self-development, but either in terms of your interests or your needs, shall we say, at the time, or your sense of awareness. Because I remember at one point, as a young student, someone asked me about, I hope that person isn't listening, asked me about what I thought of Titian or Velasquez, or could have asked me about either one, and I made some silly remark. I had never heard the names of either one of these guys. I was probably a first-year student. And so I could say that that's fairly embarrassing, except, first-year students being what we are. So you're going to see through this little exercise that I decided to go ahead and do for David, where I find myself. And there's nothing about this that is anything about what you should do to yourself. You actually would probably want to sit down and ask the same question. Create your own group of pictures and your own questions. But this does tell you a lot about where I am at the moment. I think it may surprise you who I don't choose, but sometime earlier on, I probably would have been closer to asking questions of Michelangelo and Millet and a couple other guys, Rembrandt, than these questions. But this could be interesting for everybody. By the way, everything I'm trying to do is, for your own consideration, just to open up conversation, just to just open up your mind and get you thinking, about the larger questions. One of the great ones, of course, is always, what are we here for? I mean, what is the purpose of painting? Does it have a higher than all of us kind of a presence and, as it were, a calling that we ought to be wondering about and seeking out? And if we find them to act within, that's a question I've put to you before. So I started out with Giorgione, and so my question to Giorgione was your orientation toward color and mass, along with a pure aesthetic. And I am talking about the immediate age before him, and many people might argue with me about that question of whether this is a pure aesthetic, but this is me talking. Your orientation toward color and mass, along with a pure aesthetic, and imagine me with whatever kind of beer is more likely wine with Giorgione. Uh, uh, Along with a pure aesthetic, beauty for its own sake and not as an adjunct to the story, has resonated and set an example to this day. When did you realize or decide that you should be, that should be your pursuit? And what were the influences that got you there? So that's the question. Let's just look at Giorgione for a second. You can see what I'm talking about when I say that. Possibly, maybe you can't, but it's this painting up in the left is like, it represents a very, very specific type of thinking about painting that seems to suddenly have shifted things just that little bit. So we say that about Velázquez shifting to the pure visual, and these things keep happening. They're always alluded to earlier. Different painters have elements of this thing going on, and by the way, in different ways. But this is becoming something just a bit different, isn't it? This Giorgione thing here, when you begin to realize that he's treating the rectangle rather than treating the story. And by the way, this is a story. It's some sort of an allegory, music, the arts allegory. But it does seem to be in the class of music, in the sense of art for art's sake. Do we have to really know what it is or anything like that, in the purest sense of that word. And in a secondary sense, yeah, you want to know what it is. You want to know that it's something in that direction. It'll help. It won't hurt, put it that way. I say in the direction of allegory. But yeah, so then you have his altarpiece there that also has some of that aesthetic. Now obviously being applied to a purposeful painting that was an assignment, a job, a commission. So that's my question for Giorgione. What would my question be for Veronese? And by the way, these are the ones that I sort of have questions of. Veronese, lay out the process by which you accomplished the marriage of Cana, including from where the concept came to the composition, and to the physical, first this, then that, execution. Now, I asked that question because that picture seems to rather be one of those methodical, craftsman-like productions. I get a sense, at least from Titian, there's a lot more inspiration. I get the sense with Veronese, he's more like Jerome, in that he seems to be have a more workmanlike approach to this thing. More, I don't know, I don't want to say mechanics, but there's something about it. And obviously, you're not going to be Titian and fail at that. In fact, Titian's good at it. But this guy seems to have rather focused on it in a way that looks more left-brained. That's just me talking. So then, Veronese, knowing your reputation for excellence in it, could you discuss your thinking about the role and use of color in your work? And that is because the aesthetic is so high. He's historically had this thing about being the greatest colorist of all time, and it's this reputation, I should say. So I just want him to talk about that. I'd like to know more about what his thinking was. Obviously, I'm this guy who, as you'll see before we get to the end here, who has found Degas to be something really special in the history of Western art. And there's a difference between him and Veronese. Veronese seems to still have that sort of the heavy burden of the story on him, whereas by the time you get to Degas, especially that last bunch of years of Degas before his eyes failed, you're finding a guy that actually decided that it wasn't the story. It's the music. And I put words in his mouth by saying that, as you all know. So there's the Veronese, and this is, at least on my screen here right now, it's a quite nice reproduction of that picture. I can't tell you it's a true one because I've never seen the thing in person, but it's got a remarkable quality of color, really, really rich and complex interplay. And it's just one of those that has, without thinking hard about it, just look at the general sense of it. If this picture is true, the general sense of the color being just marvelous, right? Just overall marvelous. By the way, sometime maybe we should just do that. Look at who I think the greatest colorists are, if I wanted to do that, and pull a few of that, a few of those fruits off of that tree. But about the same time, and by the way, I am doing this sort of chronologically. So I came up with Utamaro, and the Japanese have always intrigued me, but Utamaro in particular. This Kitagawa is his first name, Kitagawa Utamaro. The purity and richness of your aesthetic is unique even in Japanese art. Now, that's me being me. That's a conversation that the Japanese trained painter and that person who lives in that background would have something to say about. I just look at Japanese art and I notice which of these guys I keep coming back to. And you would say, well, maybe that's just because you're a predilection. Maybe it is, but I think one of my predilections is always for what pleases me without knowing what anything is. What pleases the eye, which one has, again, I use the word music, which one has that quality, that aesthetic quality. So my question to him, the purity and richness of your aesthetic is unique even in Japanese art, in my opinion. Tell us about the background for your development and who and which of your antecedents most fed into that. So I want to know how he developed that, and I'm talking about what makes it unique, his particular one, and each of these things, as you can see, is hanging much more on the aesthetic and the purely visual than anything else. So here's Utamaro. I'll give you 6 of Utamaro's pictures. I used to think of these as being all over the place. You look up Utamaro, you'll see what I'm talking about. You have to get past some stuff you may not want to look at, but yeah, this just gives you a little taste that he's very aware of what a huge part of what Western art eventually gets into. That is to say, the purely visual, what we call, for example, the spotting of the darks. But the idea of colors that go magically together, marvelously together. It was one thing when you were talking to Veronese about how beautiful that was and his colors went well together. But most painters in Western art, you don't walk up to their paintings and say, whoa, when it comes to color. You just don't. And there are a few that you do. Certain ones have, through different times, different people. But mostly you're talking, everybody's into the sort of realism. Western art's got this burden that often pushes down, I would say, on the, especially the aesthetic of color. So there's that going on, but this whole idea of being purely visual, the spotting idea, the distribution of colors across a page, and the variations within that color, those sorts of things. As you can see, for example, in the several purples or the red tendencies in this area here, you can see the whole thing about the red, yellow, and blue thing here, and all of them being beautiful in relation to each other. I show this one fairly often. It's one that I can't find a better reproduction of it, so I keep using that one. But then they asked Vermeer, so it's natural you could figure that I'd probably reach for Vermeer in a conversation like this, and I say to Vermeer, Vermeer, you're a Dutch painter, you're a painter of Dutch genre interiors. There were dozens of them. I mean, they were all over the place, right? Everybody did it, the ones who were doing still life or portrait. But you found a connection to the beautiful that many Dutch masters seem to have never made. Talk about what influences or events led you in this strikingly different direction. That's my question, even for now. Some people want to argue that it was the Japanese or some Japanese influence in there. Maybe some of these prints, their dates are rather similar, and the Dutch trade was big. They were all over the place. Certainly they were out in the East. I believe this is what you call the Golden Age in Holland, and we're talking We're talking real serious international trade center. So here's Vermeer, and you all know Vermeer, but that's my question. Keep it in mind. What are the influences that led you in this strikingly different direction? There's an aesthetic in his work that is not touched, in my view, by anybody else in Dutch art. And I'm talking even Rembrandt. This is not the same quality. There's a different quality. And I'm not saying Rembrandt is ugly or anything like that. Lacks any aesthetic. But this thing goes to a place where it is on its face beautiful. And it seems that when I say that, I'm always talking about the aesthetic. It's got so many different layers, of course, but I'm talking about just the reaction, the aesthetic reaction of your eye, not what it is, what it says, or any of those things. It's just the pleasure that these things give to your eyes. So, among other things, by the way, there's this remarkable sort of, for a picture that's what I call symphonic, or at least it feels like a chorale. It's amazing how quiet these things are. And I might even ask him what he was thinking if he had an idea of keeping it quiet, of keeping the whole picture quiet. But he created quietude. And if you want to talk about events happening in talk about Rubens, I don't think there's any quiet anywhere in any Rubens. but with our friend Vermeer, that sense of quiet, that sense of repose, giving this idea of repose an even more profound meaning than just order, is really impressive. So then who do I go to after Vermeer? Here's a big surprise to everybody. Well, actually, this should be a surprise. I'm going to talk, Ang comes up because of date, because of chronology. But my question for Ang hasn't got much to do with his aesthetic, well, in that one sense, but here's my question. Ang, you're known for your unique skill. I should be showing these images first, shouldn't I, like that? You're known for this, for your unique skill in idealization of the figure. Discuss your rationale for not just using the buildings and the costumes, but for actually borrowing the aesthetic and style of the era. And I'm talking about the arts, right? Of the era and place to which your historical subjects belong. Any practical suggestions for accomplishing that idealization, such as possibly the study of their sculpture, that would be the copying of like cast drawing, would be welcome. Yeah, it's interesting when you think of the difference between him and Jerome, and I would never take anything away from Jerome. Jerome had no idea or no desire to do this. Jerome just paints, no matter what era he's painting, they're just people, everyday people. As if you went, for example, in the Oriental pictures, you just go there as if you were a traveler, and you just take photographs of the people, and your painterly aesthetic is all done, in the mechanics of moving figures around and standing them in front of the right buildings, getting the right colors and costumes. But Ang does something really different. Veronese would do, the Moses, the princesses finding Moses in the bulrushes, and they would all be dressed in Victorian garb. That's a different little game. That's not what what Jerome was doing, but this is kind of a big question, and so I'm going to show you that work and notice how he can accommodate style. If you want to call it that mannerism of a time. So here's now the influence of Raphael, but the one on the right is Raphael, the one on the left could be Raphael, couldn't it? But that's Ang. But you can see it feels like it's of that era. These figures actually feel considerably more French. I would say that about them. But the interpretation, hands, face, all this stuff is very much of that of his god Raphael, of his great master, the guy that he really did rather worship. It's funny, as much as the pre-Raphaelites exist, here's the Raphaelite. Here's the Raphaelite of all time, who is probably 100 years before those guys, roughly. So here he is going to the Orientalist route down that road, and look at the figures. I mean, this is pure Persian art right here. Or so is this. I mean, even the way of flattening and patterning, never mind just the costumes. But there's a quality here that just resonates of Persian art. And that's different. I could show you a Jerome. You should look it up for yourself. All those, the slave auctions and things like that, where you're talking about being in their in that world, but they don't resonate like this. So you see what I mean? So you see, my question to him would be, tell us about this, and what was your thinking? How'd you go about? And it isn't that I think any of us could figure this out, by the way. I just say that. So you might add another question, and that is, why in the heck did you do that? What was that about? Again. So if he was a great student of sculpture, say he did a lot of cast drawing, and he ran into some of these other styles, he might have been intrigued by the difference between Roman sculpture and Greek sculpture, and perhaps Persian, if he ever saw it. Never mind, of course, the paper art. I mean, there were prints, there were Persian prints and that sort of thing. And again, Europe was full of trade. So you would have been able to see prints from probably just about anywhere. And guys with eyes would, right? The way Degas picked up those things. I thought this was a nice piece. I've always thought that that one on the left, which it looks like I may have skinnied it up somehow, is as fun an example of something that looks like it could have been painted in Raphael's day. Its curious flatness, but the interpretation, the stylization of the figures. And just to show you, this is the Fornarina. This is supposed to be Raphael on the Fornarina. And there may be a picture somewhere where he actually, and I just couldn't find any more than this one off in a hurry there. But these guys here, these two are supposed to be self-portraits of Raphael, and there's the Fornarina, who this is. And the torquing of the head is most amusing. I'd love to be able to turn my head that far. I won't ask him about that unless he wants to say that was a part of a mannerism that he found at the time. So there's Raphael. Where do we go from here? Well, of course, we go to Degas. This is me. These are the guys I've talked to. It just, as I said, it would be now. I still want to talk to Michelangelo about quite a number of things, but mostly sculpture related, oddly enough. Degas, at what point in your development did you discover the music? And I'm going to have to allow that he might cuss at me and say a couple nasty or pithy things about my taking an approach like this. At what point in your development did you discover the music, Degas? The way the abstract elements define our form, because he clearly did. And if that interpretation of your aesthetic is true, what were the works or the individuals that most influenced that awareness? So that's where you might start asking about the influence of the Japanese. But Degas got to this place here, which has, you can see that it's just delight to the eye. It really is way, 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 way beyond realism. And this is one of the great draftsmen of all time. So those of you who think you're special because you're realist, beware, because you might be missing everything, right? But so there's Degas. There's that question, right? This stuff. This is the art of painting. The art of painting, not the art of realism, not the art of storytelling. This is the art of the visual impression. This is the art of visual delight. When painting leaves off the words and becomes music, except it doesn't have to leave off the words to become the music, for the words to be innocuous, right? It's like having a certain level of chorale stuff built in to a beautiful symphony that you might attend. There's this marvelous sense of that he gets, that I'm there just simply to be, you could call it an escape, but just to be out of my senses and into this world of, I should say, I'm sorry, I apologize, out of my left brain and my story brain and my what's this about brain to, whoa, oh my, and just stand back and let it saturate, Very much like what dance can be, which is, as you can see, what this refers to. I wonder to what extent, for example, the influence on Degas was the dance itself and his seeking for an aesthetic similar to that, seeing that dance wasn't really a story, but it was actually, movement, color, all these other things, and that all are just simply there because of the story, but not therefore secondary. They're there just as a vehicle. The story is just there as a vehicle for that thing. And so you're talking ballet and all that sort of thing. If the ballet is not great to look at the movement, the dance, all the choreography isn't amazing, the story's what it is, right? Go get a movie, get a good movie that tells the same story. I mean, silly, of course. And so there he is again. And what subject? What subject? I mean, whereas the relevance of the subject in these pictures is such that you can tell what I'm saying is so. But my question to Degas is when did you wake up to this? And then, because it's clearly you waked up to it and you just settled into this. You never went back. You never went back to those early storytelling salon style pictures. You never went back to those tedious realism pictures. You never went back. And the reason isn't because you were weak in some way. It was because you were finding your focus. You're finding your. I might putting words into Degas' mouth, and he'll cuss at me, just like he does with anybody else. And say ironic things. So, well, that's the discussion, David. You have possibly not what you expected. And I didn't want to do this in any way that would relate to other people. It's just simply about me. When you go look at Degas, you may want to know what the heck. Why is this there and that here? And how did he use a charcoal? And how did he use and the layers of this kind of drawing versus that, or tracing drawings after drawing from life and all that. What does all that mean? That might be your discussion with him at a certain stage in your life. You want to know about this. You want to know about that. After all, for example, he's an imaginative painter. I refer to that all the time. He's an imaginative painter who finds what you may as well call the impressionist music, which in itself is a remarkable step. Step beyond, step or you could say combination. What is that word? The recombining of things. Finally, you're finally getting to, oddly enough, the purity, the real point of things. But yeah. So again, as I said, so you at your different stages will ask different questions of different painters. Period. This is where I am now. So, for whatever it's worth, I don't really mean this one, and probably the next one, and the last one are all sort of way too much about me. I'm much more interested in the painting thing itself. But in any case, thank you for the question, David. And again, thank you all for subscribing, sharing, commenting, and do stay tuned. We're aiming at a live event a week from. Well, you're going to be seeing this on Sunday, so a week from last Saturday. All right, and the dates will be put up there. All right. All right. See you next time.